It's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the last full keynote of the Global Education Conference. We know we have stretched our audience thin with over 425 sessions, and we do have a set of sessions that are just finishing now, so people will start coming in. But Gavin, you're going to have to consider this a studio audience, because I'm thinking that a good number are going to end up watching the recording rather than the actual live session. Welcome, Gavin.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the Global Education Conference is sponsored by iEarn, BrainPop, American Federation of Teachers, Get Ideas, HP, Intel Engage, and International Baccalaureate. We're so appreciative of the sponsorship and support this year and the enthusiasm for the conference. And it's their third year. Yes, Peggy, don't despair, though. We do have Ed Greger is going to do a wrap-up in the next hour and kind of a closing celebration. It has really been a blast, but 5 days, 24 hours a day is a lot of material, and we recognize that many of you may be feeling that you're at the end. So let's give you a chance, though, to tell us where you're listening from. Those of you who are in the studio audience, click on the star to the left of the map, then click on the map. We've been joking because I've been holed up in a hotel in Washington, D.C. for the week, keeping out of everybody's hair. And I feel like I'm in a cage. I'm so ready to escape. Looks like Spain, a couple in India. Oh, no, one of those is Nepal, because I know Gavins is here. Please do give a shout out in the chat as people come in the room, welcome them, and encourage them to let us know where they're participating from. I've personally really been looking forward to this keynote. Can't wait to hear what Gavin has to say to us. Gavin, I'm here at your disposal. I'll collect questions in the chat, and feel free to call on me at any point in time. And I'll turn the time over to you now.
Thank you, Steve. And it's a great pleasure to be joining the Global Education Conference and to be working with you on it, and to have listeners from all across the world. Just a little bit of background, personal background. I work as an independent advisor in education and work internationally. The types of things that I'm involved in are, I'm a fellow of Education Fast Forward, which is an initiative to create global discussions on key issues within education and then move them towards real action. And some of this, what I'm going to talk about, in learning to collaborate to learn, relates to a paper that I did for Education Fast Forward. I'm also the program director for the Education World Forum, which is a big event in London each year, which brings ministers of education together to discuss the issues that they face and the challenges that they're meeting. And just one of the other roles that I'm involved in is as Senior Director of International Relations for the new Media Consortium. For those of you based in the States particularly, but also across the world, I'm sure you know of the Horizon reports, which talk about the trends that there are in technology, and it's the new Media Consortium that supports those. So, turning to learning to collaborate to learn. And just what I want to do with this is talk a little bit about collaboration first, and then move towards the importance of student voice or learner voice within that. So here goes. Many human activities involve not just sharing information in the form of communication, but also people working together to solve common problems, so coming together in different ways. Learning is one of them. That communication and collaboration is critical to learning. And indeed, thinking together is an important part of life. But it often seems that thinking together is sort of ignored or even repressed in formal education. Certainly has been in some circumstances. So the students sit passively while others speak to them. At the same time, when we move to looking at the world of work, collaborative skills are increasingly recognized as critical for success. A survey of 500 business leaders recently asked about the 3 most important skills for new hires to succeed in their organization. The top 3 were problem solving, which came in at about 49%, collaboration and the ability to work as a team, which came in at 43%, and critical thinking, which was about 36%. So collaboration is right up there, and problem solving alongside it. Together with critical thinking, which is, if you like, something that is an important skill in collaboration. It's not about simply accepting what other people say, but working with them and, if you like, arguing your point of view. In her book, Welcome to the Entrepreneur Country, Julie Meyer says successful leaders will exhibit characteristics of collaborative de-risking, building strong relationships, and understanding networks. It's hard to argue with that. She goes on to say that command and control business environments, which we've seen in the past, will yield suboptimal results. So there's a lot of opinion and evidence which suggests that collaboration is critical. So how is it in schools? A little while ago now, there was an Ipsos Mori poll, which was conducted in English schools, where students were asked about their preferred ways to learn. 55% said they prefer to learn in groups. That says something about collaboration and how learning together is a good thing. 39% said they liked learning by doing practical things. And 35% said they liked to learn with friends. I will admit that 21% did say they liked to work alone, at least some of the time. But I think overall the figures suggest that students recognize and enjoy learning with others has its benefits, and they presumably want to work through working or want to learn through working collaboratively. Thinking about collaboration, it's a bit like quality. I think it can be good or bad, and indeed Morten Hansen's book on collaboration, he describes a circumstance where collaboration generates a whole lot of activity, running around to meetings and sharing ideas, but achieving far too little. So I think we've got to be careful with it. It's not just collaboration is good and non-collaboration is bad. We have to think about how it really helps us. And part of our role in teaching and learning, I think, should be about how you encourage the good habits and the benefits of good collaboration. If we go down a very theoretical, or if we a typically teacher area on this, Vygotsky says that the important learning occurs through social interaction with a skillful tutor. In Vygotsky's world, he says the skillful tutor can be a peer learner, a friend or a sibling, a parent or a teacher. And an example he draws out is of a child given her first jigsaw. Alone, she performs poorly and becomes a bit frustrated. But if she sits with her father and her father demonstrates some basic strategies, for example, finding the corners and the edge pieces, he gives her the pieces to put together and encourages her. Gradually, the child can gain confidence and the father can step back. So it's not about taking over. It's not about taking the space from the child, but it's about showing giving a bit of guidance, demonstrating the strategies, and then the child learns and takes responsibility themselves. According to Vygotsky, this kind of social interaction involving cooperative or collaborative dialogue promotes cognitive development. Bringing us up to more recent things, Russ Quaglia and the Quaglia Institute and the My Voice National Student Report of 2011 talks about the ways that curiosity and creativity can be developed and learned. Among them are demonstrating the relevance of material learned and encouraging collaboration and inquisitiveness. With these in mind, his report notes that in the survey's findings, the development of curiosity and creativity in the classroom are mixed. On the positive side, 70% of students enjoy working on projects with other students, so that backs up the earlier information. But roughly 2/3 of students are comfortable asking questions in class and feel they're encouraged to be creative in school. However, nearly 80% feel that when they learn in school, it will benefit their future. But just 43% say that their classes help them understand what is currently happening in their everyday lives. Now, the important part of this is drawing out what learners are thinking, beginning to hear something of the learner's voice. But without that learner's voice, what the students are learning is not well aligned to what they need for their everyday lives. So that's what's coming through. So perhaps what we need to think about is how to collaborate more successfully. And to do that, what we need to do is to listen to a greater degree to students' voice. I want to go to just that's quite a heavyweight introduction in a way, but turning to some little stories around this. One of the things with listening to students' voices that a story that I heard some time ago was from Stephen Hippel, who I guess a number of people will know. Stephen was working with groups of students who produced a presentation about a word, and the students had chosen the word. And he'd set up to show these the presentations by the students to some VIPs the next day, so an audience of important people. As Stephen reviewed the work overnight, he noticed that one group had spelled their word superfluous incorrectly. And he worried about what to do. The event was the next day, and it was supposed to be about learner voice. So should he correct it, or should he just leave it as it is, or should he tell the students? After all, it was their work, it was their voice. Having worried about it through the night, the next morning he phoned the students, and he explained the misspelling. As the misspelling of superfluous was explained, there was a silence at the other end of the line. Then a student voice piped up and said, "You just don't get it, Stephen, do you? We think superfluous has just too many letters." Which always seemed to me a great bit of a sense of humour, a great piece of ingenuity and innovation at its simple and best. But they had been creative in what they were doing, and Stephen at that point had just not recognised it, just thought it was a mistake. Another little example of learner voice was one very personal to me, and forgive me for telling you a very personal story. When I was about 14, I moved from Scotland to England. And that picture is of a kilt, believe it or not. But the type we didn't wear these to school, I promise you. But that was a sort of ancient kilt. The journey from Scotland to England is a short journey in miles, perhaps, but in the world of education, it seemed a world apart. You may think that we spoke the same language, but I can assure you that some teachers could not understand my Scottish accent, and I had trouble with some of theirs. Aside from language, the nature of subjects was different, and I was really unsettled and unhappy at school. At home, and over a number of days, I pressed my father again and again, with all the emotional blackmail that I could muster, to allow me to move back to school in Scotland. A fairly complicated process, really. But eventually my father reacted, not with a firm pushback, but with, "Okay, Gavin, I'll do whatever you want. You decide." I think he judged it perfectly. And something important happened, as I now had to think through the pros and cons for myself, the practicalities of what a move might really mean, and to consider how things might be planned, and to take responsibility for the decision. In that moment, my outlook shifted and my position changed. And after some time, I sheepishly told him that I'd make a go of school in England, and I wouldn't be heading back to Scotland. And my father continued to offer all the support that he could. But I think he gave me that one of the most powerful and memorable learning experiences of my school years. That when given responsibility, or even a share of responsibility, how you look at things differently. These, of course, are just stories in terms of learner voice or taking responsibility. But what does research say? If we look at an example of John Hattie's research that has led to his Invisible Learning books. In Visible Learning, Maximizing Impact for Teachers, John Hattie identifies the #1 ranked influence on learning as being self-reported grades and student expectations. By the way, at the bottom of the list of influences on learning are mobility, television, and retention, but these aren't my focus now. The research was based on 800 meta-analyses, over 50,000 studies, and around 240 million students in total. So it was a significant piece of research, drawing together elements of research from many other places. Hattie's message is that teachers need to provide opportunities for students to be involved in predicting their own performance, in making learning intentions and success criteria transparent, and having high but appropriate expectations, and providing feedback at the appropriate levels. So how can you do that without learner voice? And remember, what John Hattie's work showed was this was the greatest influence of all in terms of students learning successfully. So all this is critical to building confidence in students and confidence in their taking on challenging tasks. So I think there is real evidence that suggests that student voice is important, and their ability to express their expectations of their work is critical. Educating students to have high, challenging, appropriate expectations is among the most powerful influences in enhancing learning student achievement, is what John Hattie said. Of course, that last line draws it back into the responsibility of teachers. As John Hattie's book is, after all, Visible Learning for Teachers, I would add emphasis to the teacher's role in encouraging student voice and listening to and supporting that voice. For me, learner voice shouldn't only be about the set plays of student councils. It should be about the culture and practice of teaching, learning and personal development, and the development of collaboration between the teacher and the student in encouraging the student's learning and making the most of it. I suspect there are many, many schools in which learner voice is playing a critical role in the life and practice of the school and its community. Indeed, I know many schools where that is happening. But I also suspect that it is far from mainstream, and there are some societies and countries where the direction of travel may be still towards compliance rather than the co-design and co-responsibility for learning. I often think of this in terms of what we're trying to do with learning. Are we trying to create dependency of the learner on the teacher, or are we trying to build capacity of the learner so the learner can be independent? I think that's critical in life, in schools, both in terms of the way that the learners learn from the teacher, but in terms of the way that the teacher's own development takes place. Listening to students improving schools is the headline that Russ Quaglia uses. So back to Russ and his research, and his belief that all educators can improve today's teaching and learning environments by listening to students and understanding their aspirations. The My Voice survey gathers and analyzes student perceptions of their experience at school, as well as the perceptions of staff and parents. Excuse me, forgive me, I've not moved the slides on, but there's the Visible Learning for Teachers information, and that gives you the self-reported grades. This is the Aspirations Academy for that Russ Quaglia leads. So the Quaglia Institute for Student Aspirations is working both in the United States and now through the Aspirations Academies Trust primary and secondary schools in England. This approach is built on learner voice, and there's a link there should you wish to look up more. I believe the move to listening to more learner voice and even more a more even balance with student direction is critical. Recent and current economic change suggests that the old models of being schooled for compliance and employment will no longer bring secure, successful future lives. The Royal Society for the Arts publication, Generation Enterprise, captures some of this, and this slide shows just one part of that. But that report can be freely downloaded. What the report says is that there is increasingly strong data which suggests that the younger generation is a highly entrepreneurial bunch. A number of recent surveys have found that younger people are becoming keener to set up their own businesses and are starting to do so. A recent poll of Americans aged 18 to 34, for example, found that more than half would like to start their own firm or indeed had already done so. So that new world, that changing world outside school, is one which is demanding, if you like, greater student voice. The enterprise is demanding greater collaboration. So those two key components I think are critical in their development at school. A separate survey for the RSA's research found that 35% of people under 30 in employment had started their own business on the side. Well, a study of 4 million Facebook profiles for people aged between 18 and 29 concluded that the pages displayed an unprecedented entrepreneurial spirit. The profiles indicate that increasing numbers in this age bracket not only want to start their own startups, or had already done so, but they prefer to work for startups than established companies. I think playing to that is an increasingly important thing for many countries, and many countries are going to need to rely on this more. But it's not entirely new. If you look at the profile of employment and the number of opportunities with small companies, you'll find that, or certainly I find that in the areas in which I work, they make a remarkably large contribution to employment and success for young people. So perhaps enterprise is working well for these young people, and they are managing it despite their education and the older views of the world, because education so often does not bring out their voice or the collaboration that enterprise requires. Perhaps we should be changing things then in education, or changing things more rapidly. With apologies to all of you who are already working for this, but as I've said, I think the center of gravity and the degree to which we listen to learners and the degree of collaboration that goes on with them is generally not as high as it might be. So we should fan the flames of enterprise and by supporting and investing in these young people so that their opportunity and positive impact is greater. Perhaps we should be doing so that we can encourage them and nurture the skills they need for this changing world of work. I suggest that learner voice is critical in this. So what are the examples of where we are working on learner voice, we are working with collaboration and taking things further? So I just want to suggest a few examples which are worth a look in this context. The first is Apps for Good. Apps for Good is an opportunity for young people to identify an issue within their community which they would like to address and build an app to help address that. So they're looking for a problem that can be helped and be solved with the use of an app. So that's a problem discovery, the identifying of what is wrong in the world. The second part is the research, which looks into that problem, finds out the factors associated with it, and begins to allow a design of a solution to emerge. Having gone through that emergent design, there is then going into full product design so that you produce something that can resolve things. But what's really important in that is it's not something which is just done as an academic in a trivial sort of pursuit. It is something that is done looking at a real problem. It is the research is about going out and asking people questions so that you get the design right. The design becomes something that if they progress with apps, through the Apps for Good program, something that they will work with professional apps developers to produce the solution, and then they can build and test the final app. An example of this that I saw was a school where the students in the school, it was an ethnic community that where the ethnicity of the parents of the students became an issue when there were parents' evenings at the school. And there was misunderstanding and between the parents and the teachers, and poor communication because of language differences. And what the children built was an app. What they identified and what they built was an app that would translate the key phrases associated with their work in the school so that the parents could better understand what the teachers were saying, and the key phrases that might be used by parents were made available so that teachers would better understand the parents' responses. So it was a communication aid to parents' evenings where there were multiple languages. And that was one of the successful apps that came out of that program. Lots of things in that which I really like, not least the fact that it is learner's voice coming out again, not least that it is collaboration between the learners and the professional programmers if the learners don't have all the skills to do it themselves. The research, which again is part of the collaboration, and the learners themselves beginning to find out information from the sources who needed to be spoken to, so the teachers and the parents in that particular case, and defining and being able to solve the problem as a result of it. And all that wraps up nicely in an approach to entrepreneurship and enterprise. Another example of a program that works in this way, I think, is the Imagine Cup, which Microsoft has run, and the figures I've had is something around 350,000 students globally work on developing technology-based solutions, and most recent years these include the Millennium Development Goals. Somebody I know is Vinny Lohan, a young man living in New Zealand, originally from India. He came third in the Imagine Cup a few years ago. And this slide shows his company now, OneBeep. It's a social enterprise, but what OneBeep does is it allows you to send learning objects or pieces of information through radio waves and then download them to the computer. By sending through the radio waves to the radio and then downloading to the computer, you then extend the networks. So those in remote rural areas are able to get hold of learning objects and indeed other pieces of information in a way that wasn't previously possible. So a really creative piece of work which is now being adopted in a number of countries. So this enterprise that has been encouraged through things like the Imagine Cup is actually coming through to fruition and is actually helping thousands of people, or has the potential to help thousands of people. Another example is, which many of you may know, but the Taking It Global team based in Canada looked at the problems that the world faces, which were listed, have been listed in a book which looks at the 20 problems that the world faces, and they went out to their community to ask which of those problems they would particularly like to address. The community chose deforestation as the thing they would like to address, and so what they did was they then built a program to look at, called Deforestation, which was about through through the students, developing actions that would help reduce deforestation. So by using the power of the number of students available, looking at being able to buy up pieces of forest and being able to look at where the forest was being diminished and having their eyes on that, so they're engaging them in that. There was also a part of it which was about saving the orangutan based on science, and the orangutan that were being displaced in forests that were being cut down in Indonesia, and taking real action to support work in saving the orangutan and also reducing deforestation. So it's another case of enterprise, collaboration, learner voice coming together, and real action, which is having an impact not on the local levels perhaps of the apps for good, but on a very serious global level. So there we have, if you like, a range of things which are resulting from collaborations, resulting from learner voice, which are having an impact at community level, at perhaps a regional or a country level, and at a global level, which are really improving the world. So I think it may be a grand statement, but I think that sort of collaboration is something that we should be engendering in school. And we do that by listening to learners, by working with their enthusiasm and energy, and by supporting them in that collaboration, perhaps in investing in their ideas. And through that, one, we get a better world, and two, we get better learning. So that brings me to the end of the formal bit that I want to say. And I don't know if anything was coming through from you, Steve, on this, but if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you so much. If there are questions for Gavin, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and take the microphone. This is a topic of particular interest to me, both the voice aspect and the dependency issue. And I was unfamiliar with Hattie's books, but there are two that relate to this, and I couldn't tell which of the two I should order, or both. Gavin, do you have a recommendation there?
Yeah, the one that I would point towards, the later one, is Visible Learning for Teachers, Maximizing Impact on Learning. And as is often the case with courses, with books of a series like that, that gives you some summary of what went before. But it's a very powerful study in terms of the data that it's drawn on, and gives some real guidance in the way you can use that data to influence the way that you teach.
Thank you for that. I'm fascinated by it. If you think of teachers and students sort of living in parallel lives, and teachers as learners, how would you move this conversation forward, thinking about teacher voice?
Absolutely. I think this runs through the way that we organize our work, whether we're in whatever sphere of work we're working in. And I think there are signs that there is growing recognition that by, maybe in particular parts of the world, there is some growing recognition that by engagement of the teacher voice or the worker voice, we can come up with far more powerful solutions, and also more engaged teams of people by listening to that voice. In a conversation recently with Ruska Quaglia, one of the things we talked a little bit about was exactly that, and how in the school in England, or one of the schools in England with which he's working, each of the students has an individual education plan, which is how they plan what's coming next. And that involves a conversation with the teacher about what the student would expect to be doing and what they'd like to do. And what he introduced was the individual education plan for the teacher. Now, this shouldn't be unusual, but it happened to be in that particular case that how many teachers have individual education plans for themselves, and get the opportunity for their voice to be heard in that. So there's that relationship, which is about the relationship with the organization and making sure that teacher voice is heard there. And then I think in the relationship between students and teachers, I think the practice of learners and teachers collaborating, co-designing their education and their learning is something that teachers actually have a powerful opportunity to lead on. It's not something to be done lightly. It's not something to be done as a little bit of a show, but it's amazing when you start engaging people in the decision making, the different attitude they take. In my little example of my experience with my father, I know that's a very narrow example, but that for me was a game-changing situation. So I think also, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say also one of the reasons why I mentioned enterprise is I think enterprise is one of those areas where it becomes more possible to do, because we're not with enterprise. You need ideas. You can be doing it in relation to any part of the community and to things that are happening in the school and the lives of any of the children, in anything that they've identified. So you get onto a more even ground, if you like. It's a chance for people to express themselves and express their ideas, and then to work around to where your solution might be. So bringing enterprise into it, I think, is one way of encouraging a more cooperative approach to learning.
So again, if you've got questions for Gavin, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. Gavin, increasingly, I think a lot of us expected that the web and social media would increase agency and opportunities for voice, but it feels as though there's sort of realistically been an increase in control. Particularly if you look at U.S. education, the sort of general narrative is the high-stakes testing and the like. And there's legislation that would restrict educators from participating in social media because of the potential for contact with students outside of school. Is this an intriguing dilemma, that when we could actually be having more voice, there seems to be more sense of control?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. It's very interesting in an international context. I was just this week with friends again from what is commonly called Northern Europe, which is a pretty poor description. But if you look at the Scandinavian countries, and to a degree, I think the Netherlands as well, there is a quite different culture in terms of use of the internet. And I hope I'm not misreading it or misrepresenting it in any way. But essentially, I feel that the culture that they've had, which has been about taking more personal responsibility, has meant that the typical situation is for there not to be blocks on the internet, for children to have to learn to use the internet in the same way that they have to learn to cross the road. It's a dangerous place, and so you need certain skills and certain awarenesses in order to be able to use either the road or the internet safely. So they're more inclined to develop those skills in that way, and therefore they are able to take advantages of the good things that the internet can bring, and the social interaction that it can bring, and the interaction between teachers and students is not such a frightening thing because the students are aware in the first instance. That doesn't make it a perfect world, but it, I think, puts them in a stronger position than many other countries, including, I would say, much of the UK, and as you've said, the United States, where there is more of a controlling approach to the way that the internet is used.
So again, I am reluctant to be monopolizing with my questions, although I'm intrigued and continue to be interested. So if you have a question for Gavin, please post it in the chat or feel free to raise your hand. Gavin, we were talking before the show started because we've noticed in this particular venue, the Global Education Conference, which we hope actually provides kind of a model of teacher voice, being highly inclusive, encouraging teachers to present and participate, and students as well. But we've also noticed a temptation toward dependency, a desire to solve problems for people. Is that just kind of an innate human desire to solve things for people and then to have difficulty giving them the kind of freedom? That situation of your dad is intriguing because as a parent, I know that's really hard.
Absolutely, and I so admire him for it, actually, because I think I was making his life miserable, and he, in his quiet way, came up with a very clever way of dealing with it, and I'd like to think contributed to my maturity in that one simple way of giving me the choice. Clearly took a risk in it, but that's about having judgment and taking a risk at the right time. I think there is there's a number of things here. I think it's quite hard because we all want to be secure, and quite reasonably. I understand that. And one of the ways in which you make yourself secure is make yourself indispensable. And one of the ways to make yourself indispensable is to build dependency. And yet, if you look at things like Jim Collins' books on From Good to Great, etc., what he talks about in those is how what you don't need is hero leaders of companies. What you need is people who essentially work to put themselves out of a job. They work to put themselves out of a job by developing the other leaders, by building the capacity in the company, and that's what ultimately, he argues, is what makes a great company. I think our job with our students should be entirely about building capacity. And can I tell you a story about one of these things, my experience in this? I worked in a college of further education, further and higher education in England. And in that college, I developed links through to industry. So it's like a community college in the United States. And rather than, I developed a foundation degree in e-commerce technologies. On another part of the department that I was in charge of, I built links to a number of our football clubs, or soccer clubs, as some people in some parts of the world would say. So I was running a number of the academies for the young professional footballers or soccer players in that. Eventually, the Premier League in England gave me the contract to develop PremierLeagueLearning.com. But what I had negotiated was that in order to develop this learning system for all the young Premiership professional footballers, to develop that system, I was going to use the students that I had doing this foundation degree. So these were students of technology, but I was taking them up to the Premier League's headquarters for meetings with them so they could show their designs and get those approved so that they could build the system for the Premier League. Just doing that, rather than teaching the students only, but bringing them into building a system for a client like the Premier League, it just changed relationships extraordinarily. Those students did produced wonderful work. They were so keen to do their best. They were highly motivated. The kinds of questions that I would get were not the ones that I would expect. They would ask me how they should behave when they were in meetings, how they should dress for the meetings. So rather than me telling them to do things, it was all about them wanting to present themselves in the right way to do the best work that they possibly could. And they did tremendous work out of it. What I should also say is that, just in case anybody might wonder, is that I also paid the students for this so that they The contract with the Premier League was not just for producing it, but we received money for doing that, and we paid the students a small salary for the work that they did in developing the systems. So they learned, as they built a system, a real system that was then used, and they had to manage and support for the teaching of all the young professional footballers in the Premier League. And that seemed to me a stepping back and allowing them to take responsibility.
This is such a delightful way to kind of close our conference. Again, any thoughts, questions for Gavin? Feel free to raise your hand or to put them in the chat. I think there's some collective fatigue from 5 days. I can't tell you how much I am so appreciative that this particular session is our kind of our closing full keynote. What a terrific way to finish, and I'm really hopeful that we'll continue to have this conversation. I'm gonna give one more chance here for someone to raise their hand or to put a comment in the chat. Otherwise, I think we may be done. Oh, there's Lucy. Wait, Lucy's not a moderator. Let me give her privileges here. Go ahead.
Hi, Gavin. I just wanted to say hello and say thank you for coming, from rushing from the airport from Italy to share your thoughts with us. This is the perfect kind of mellow, thoughtful kind of approach we needed at this time, because we've been digesting quite a bit this week. So thank you for sharing and taking time and making this work. It was a perfect ending. So thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. What I would say is an ending to it, perhaps, unless there is a question, that that final slide, which is, we started with collaboration, but that's my real question. Is I feel that learner voice should change the world, and just bringing that out has and working with it in a different way has an extraordinary power. And there's an extraordinary opportunity for us there to develop things. I often think that when you sit in a class, how do we know where the best idea is going to come from? How do we know where the greatest energy is going to come from? And I think it's by learning, listening to their voices and drawing on their ideas and investing in their ideas. I don't necessarily think money-wise, but investing in their ideas through supporting them, that we can change the dynamics of classrooms, we can change the dynamics of the way learning happens, and we can get much more engaged and interesting work done in schools.
Okay, shall we wrap up? Oh yeah, Noble asked a question there, and so did Ryan. So I guess we actually have a couple more. Noble wanted to know, have you had any experience with policy implementation?
Yeah, in fact, most of my experience these days is with policy implementation of a kind. Mind you, I don't think these different kinds of policies. I think often there are policies about encouraging things rather than simply dictating things. If you're dictating things, you're going back to, there are dangers in terms of you go back to creating a system where teachers are dictated to, and then they naturally dictate to the students. I think the policy thing is about taking away the obstacles, and also if you're going to get this kind of thing to happen, you need to work on teacher support and teacher development, both at an initial teacher training time and also through continuing professional development.
And Ryan wanted to know, how do you curate so many ideas?
I'm wondering if this, in terms of the lots of different ideas in terms in a class where you are a group of young people who may have all kinds of ideas. I think I mean, that does happen with the programs, some of the programs that I mentioned. I think it's part of what needs to be learned in all of this. But encouraging the students, if you get students working in teams, encouraging them to negotiate between each other, that's one of the ways you do it. So it's part of the process, part of the learning, in part of using a student voice among students, is that what they need to know is that they don't always get their own way. So bringing that voice in, and then people working, well, there's a number of ways that you can do it, but it's the students can come to agreement around the table about how they're going to work together and what they're going to work on. That's a good way. You can have voting ways that you can have done so the students vote on a particular idea. You can draw it out in different ways, but you're absolutely right to ask. This is not about kind of creating a great scattergram. If you create great scattergram, then I think you're likely to learn very little. But if you are, if you get them to negotiate and come to choose one thing that they're going to do, then you get to a much better place and much more likely to get an effective result.
Okay, I hope I haven't missed anything. I've gotten preoccupied with getting the closing celebration set up. Was there a final question? Ryan, did you want to do a follow-up on that in any way?
Sorry, I missed that, Steve.
I think we're done. Are we done? Terrific.
I think we may be.
Go ahead.
So I was just agreeing. I think we are done. And if that is the case, I'd just like to thank you for allowing me to speak, and to thank everybody who's listened in. And if anybody listens in the future, to thank them for being here too.
I can't wait to continue this conversation. Thanks, Gavin. Thanks, everybody. Don't miss our closing celebration coming up in 8 minutes with Ed Gregor. Take care. Thanks to Gavin. Thanks to you all. Bye now.